there is a complete vertical division in the way that people voted. More than regional lines, it's actually religious lines. The Muslim majority areas have by and large not voted for the BJP. I think the new Chief Minister Omar Abdullah is seized of the situation, and he's given indications that he does not want confrontation with New Delhi.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. We are looking at what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir next. There is a lot of expectation and optimism in the air because, as you know, this union territory, erstwhile state, has just had assembly elections for the first time in a decade. This follows the general elections earlier this year, and it has been non-stop political and electoral action. We have a new elected government led by Omar Abdullah of the National Conference, and the demand to restore full statehood is front and center again. What are the ramifications of all of these developments that we've seen in the past 11 months or so? I'm going to ask the executive editor of Kashmir Times and someone I go to for her deep and nuanced perspective on everything that's going on in the state, or rather now Union Territory. Anuradha, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
We've spoken in December last when the Supreme Court gave its verdict and said that the government of India's actions in 2019 were legal. Okay. Today, almost a year later, or actually less than a year later, we have seen a sea change. How would you describe the public sentiment, given that the last time you said that there was despair, there was hopelessness, there was fatigue, and there was helplessness?
Definitely, I stand by that. There is despair, there is hopelessness, and there is fatigue. And under a very repressive system, people in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir Valley, have been silenced for a long time. For them, voting was a way of, expressing themselves and also of exercising their agency. Besides people, it's not just about that people in Kashmir wanted to ensure that BJP stayed out of power. It was also about having a stable government, which probably would be powerless in the new setup, but it would give a little bit of relief from the overarching bureaucratic control, which has become distanced, which has become arrogant. So it's about people looking for a little relief, a little breathing space apart from exercising their agency.
During the campaigning, we saw a lot of color. There was a lot of talk about look campaigning in the night, campaigning on Dal Lake, and people came out. We saw the turnout. We saw the turnout for the general elections, and then we saw close to 64% turnout for the assembly elections. And you don't feel that this expresses a sense of at least expectation, if nothing else, that people have, I know you've told me in the past that just having elections does not mean that you have a effective democracy, but having said that, elections and having an elected government is the first vital step in restoring a democratic process and democracy, isn't it, and democratic
It's
rights?
it's yeah, it is a logical step and an important step. Now it remains to be seen whether that can be carried through, and there can be an effective democracy, because there are many ifs and buts. Even within Jammu and Kashmir, if you see, there is a complete vertical division in the way that people voted along regional lines, and which actually is more than regional lines, it's actually religious lines. And that is going to be one major challenge. But the bigger challenge is that the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly is no longer, it's no longer a state. It's a union territory with very limited powers. And just before the elections, ahead of the elections, there was an order that gave overarching oversight powers to the lieutenant governor, which debilitates to a great extent what the new assembly or the new government might want to do. If every decision of theirs is going to be vetted and possibly also rejected by the lieutenant governor, who is a Delhi's pointsman.
Do you see a Delhi state like situation where the relationship between the lieutenant governor and the elected government is really bitter? It's broken down administration in the national capital, and almost every decision ends up going to the court for resolution, isn't it? Do you see a situation like that going forward?
It's quite likely, if you look at the BJP's way of functioning, the BJP government at the center, how they function, even in states which are full-fledged states and which are ruled by the opposition, there is a constant confrontation with states that are ruled by the opposition. So these are full fledged states who have their own federal powers. Within a union territory, it's going to be more like Delhi. And that's going to probably be far more better. I think the new Chief Minister Omar Abdullah is seized of the situation, and he's given indications that he does not want confrontation with New Delhi. But as his government starts to act, I don't know how much of that would be possible. Whatever he has promised, he needs to deliver at the local front. At the same time, would New Delhi be happy with that? So these are they. I don't foresee an absence of tussle there. There would be tussle, but a lot depends on how this government is going to navigate these challenges.
There is a quote I have here that he gave the Hindu newspaper, and he says JNK has far too many problems to just play politics for the next 5 years. The incoming government must have a healthy relationship with the government of India. I hope the union government has the same sentiment and recognizes the fact that JNK is at a crucial stage currently. We will not be playing politics with this relationship. Now that sounds very pragmatic, but like you pointed out, it may not be easy for him to live up to these words, isn't it?
I mean, he's saying that and he's hoping that, but he also mentions, I hope that Delhi also moves with the same sentiment, and there lies the rub. Will Delhi have the be guided by similar sentiments of conciliation, of coordination, and working together? I have my doubts.
So you're saying that you see it going to be a tough road ahead for this new elected government. What do you make of the demand to restore full statehood, given that that was a poll issue and also one of the first resolutions that this new government wants to, sort of work on?
In fact, the poll promise was larger than just the restoration of the statehood. It was about, restoration of Article 370 and restoration of autonomy to Jammu and Kashmir. I wouldn't say that's an unrealistic demand, but a lot of people do realize within Jammu and Kashmir that that is not going to happen. And they may settle for some other, concessions like statehood and constitutional protections with respect to jobs and lands, and that is a major issue across the state. But these are things that are mentioned in the resolution. However, if you notice, right after the elections, even though the pitch for bringing back Article 370 was so high during the election campaigning. Right after the elections, the first thing that Omar Abdullah did was to distance himself from 370 and say that, you cannot expect this government to give it. But so he's kind of at least suspended the demand till the BJP is in power, and that is not.
That's a pragmatic approach, though, wouldn't you
I
say?
don't think so. You can't stop talking about what other people are not going to give you. And it's not been taken very well at the local level. So they probably it could have been reworded. One does understand that this government is not going to give it back, but it could possibly have been reworded. So far, there hasn't been, but people will watch, and this will be counted eventually as if the government fails to deliver, then this may be counted. The government is non-committal as of now, and there are different through there are different reports being planted in the media and circulated, or different BJP leaders talking about in different voices, some saying that state is going to be restored, some saying that statehood is not going to be restored, and the reports quoting unnamed sources. So it's all, it makes you wonder whether the government is going to respond in the affirmative on the resolution that was gained. It is a pragmatic resolution, and statehood is the next important democratic step besides the constitutional protections that lie at the heart of the present despair and sense of disempowerment of people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Talk a little bit about the election verdict, in the results, in the way you said, the regional and religious lines on which Jammu and Kashmir has voted. So Jammu has gone a very clear way with the BJP, and the Kashmir Valley has gone very clearly with the National Conference. And Mr. Abdullah was also is very cognizant of this fact, and I think he made a statement to the effect that bridges will need to be built with the people and public in Jammu. You wrote recently, decoding the election results in Kashmir Times. You talked about the naughty necklace, to quote you, of the way Jammu has voted. Just explain to us what you mean by that.
Jammu is kind of divided on the religious lines. If you look at in Jammu, the plains are the Hindu majority, and the hill regions are have a fairly Muslim majority, or an equal ratio of Hindus and Muslims. So in Pir Panchal, if you see, BJP has been, despite investing most of its energy in that area, where the star campaigners, including Modi, they had several rallies, and they were trying to create an ethnic divide by wooing the Pahadis, who include Hindus and Muslims, more Muslims. But that hasn't worked, because despite all that reservation, despite wooing them, though their vote share in the region has gone up, but the Muslim majority areas have by and large not voted for the BJP, barring one constituency in Pir Panchal out of 8, which is Hindu majority. They have not won any seat. In Pir Panchal, they managed to get 3 seats, but that is partly due to the very I would say the fragile demographic ratio between the communities, where they played up. In one constituency there was a terror attack. The former leader whose daughter was contesting the election. So, that sympathy wave that was created on the basis of terrorism, or because of the follies of the alliance, which was not functioning in some of the constituencies. Both Congress and National Conference had fielded their candidates. So it was because of that. But overwhelmingly, there is a Muslim Hindu divide. And that is important to understand, even for Omar Abdullah, as he's trying to attempt to reach out. And he has done, given a larger size of the pie to ministers
In
from Jammu,
cabinet.
even though, yes. But that alone will not be sufficient. It would be important to understand Jammu. And that is something that has not happened in the last 7 decades. Jammu, I think, is far more complex. A, it is very, very diverse. B, most political parties have neglected uh, Jammu because the political narrative has been so Kashmir centric that Jammu feels left out. The political parties, even when they come from outside, they invest more. I mean, I'm talking about Congress. They would invest more in the valley because, Kashmir is what counts politically. Even this time, they won seats in the valley. They did not win seats in Jammu, which was their, which has been their stronghold. So, or governments in the past have tried to use Jammu as a counter, for which they have promoted. Even the Congress governments have sometimes promoted or patronized or gone silent over the activities of the Hindu right wing organizations, allowing them to grow and penetrate. Now, since there's a vacuum in Jammu, that has been captured by the BJP, and they've done it very well. They are a resource rich party. They have resources in terms of money, they have resources in terms of manpower, they have an army of RSS workers who were fanned out in Jammu, and especially rural Jammu, sitting there in the villages and doing hyper local campaigns, door to door campaigns, reaching out to people with uh, despite so it's interesting that despite the despair, despite the disappointments in Jammu against the BJP, they still voted for the BJP. And these are things that need to be really understand. Why did they vote for? Why is it that the BJP is able to sell its narrative? Why is it that the BJP is able to create divisions of various kinds? So even in Jammu, while
Would it be because of the fact that there is a Hindu majority population, and that is exactly, you mentioned the word, it is not just regional, it's religious lines within which in the way in which Jammu and Kashmir have voted. So isn't that the reason actually that the BJP continues to get electoral favor in Jammu despite there being disappointment with its administrative actions?
No, that is definitely one reason. And they are able to rake up the Hindu Muslim divide again and again, despite the fact that people realize that they are not delivering, and they have let them down, they have betrayed them. There is a sense of feeling of betrayal in Jammu with respect to BJP. And there is an acceptability of national conference which has existed in the past. There is a sizable, has been a strong presence of Congress in the past. Now, all of those factors did not work because the BJP was able to sell to Jammu, A, that there needs to be a Hindu chief minister, B, that the verdict in the valley is going to be divided. If you remember, the Engineer Rashid factor and the Jamaat factor, and these are while they are seen, I mean, there is a certain, even though people in Kashmir Valley did not vote for them, either the Jamaat or Engineer Rashid's candidates, there is a lot of sympathy for him because he went to jail. He has a clean image. People look up to him. But despite that, people did not vote because they wanted a non BJP stable government. So they overwhelmingly voted for the National Conference. But in Jammu, these same figures are seen as polarizing figures, and it's very easy to use them to divide, to create that Hindu Muslim divide again and shift the focus from the BJP's failures to the fear of Muslims or so-called separatists becoming part of the government.
So you mentioned Engineer Rashid, and this contrast in the general elections. We saw Omar Abdullah lose. Lose the elections by this big margin of over 2 lakh votes, and then so much so that in the assembly elections he actually contested two seats to be, to ensure that he managed to win one, if not both. So what explains this change? Is this what you're saying about ensuring that you have a stable government, and which is why everybody in the assembly elections voted in this manner?
Yeah, I think when the parliamentary elections were happening, the Engineer Rashid factor suddenly came out of the blue, like a bolt from the blue. And after he won, I mean, people overwhelmingly voted because they could relate to him. He was a victim, as most Kashmiris would consider themselves as victims, even though they're not, all of them are not imprisoned or have faced persecution directly. But the overall atmosphere in the valley has been suffocating, and many people compare it to open air prison. So they could relate to him, and his campaign had been very organic. It started from his village with his family members, and suddenly caught up, and you know and then people started volunteering. I think the Kashmiris, for them, that was a new moment. That was the first moment in last 5 years, and they were carried away emotionally. In the assembly elections, they had enough time to think. After Engineer Rashid's, victory in the parliamentary elections, there were also questions raised. How did it? People started asking all these kind of questions, that whether, even if he's not a plant, has his, election been kind of facilitated, because sitting in jail for any Kashmiri to contest is not easy without the state having some interest in it. So these were quite kind of the questions that were being asked. So even as his, like, I mean, if you see, there were like his speeches were getting a lot of traction, his rallies were getting a lot of traction. Um, People were his interviews would be watched. People praised him a lot. If you noticed on the social media and outside social media, but there was a lot of sympathy. But while voting, I think Kashmiris are one, because of what they faced. They are one of the most politically educated and politically aware people in the world. So they voted very, very pragmatically.
In the assembly elections, are you saying that by the time the assembly elections were held, Engineer Rashid and a lot of independents that contested were seen as stooges of the the BJP,
Not
or
necessarily stooges, but not
yeah.
necessarily stooges, but people were asking questions. There were conspiracy theories. That is the government facilitating it to create a division within the valley. And so people voted in the way that there was no division.
We saw in the past few months, especially earlier this year, several attacks in the Jammu region, terror attacks in the Jammu region, directly targeting Indian security forces. But just this month, we've had this attack on migrant laborers and a doctor, in Gandarbal.
There was another one today in Tral. Yeah.
What is the security challenge that you see the Omar Abdullah government having to deal with? Though we do know and we do understand that this is not his remit or within the framework of what he can do and his government can do.
We are all asking questions. There were attacks before um, the elections. Now, suddenly, during elections, you didn't have as many attacks or violence. And as you mentioned, campaigning was happening. There was a very free from fear atmosphere where night rallies happening after a long long time, and even many contestants said that they had gone in their constituencies, they had visited areas they had not visited before. So all that was happening. There was a very free atmosphere. There was a very calm atmosphere. And suddenly, why? So these are basically failures of the intelligence and the security agencies. I think the
That
government
answer to
needs
the
to.
to the central government.
Yes, definitely. I mean, they've happened right between the parliamentary elections and the assembly elections. During those 2 3 months, there were a slew of attacks and deadly attacks, and particularly the theater of militancy had shifted to Jammu region. Now suddenly we see it coming back to Kashmir Valley. There's something very strange. So either there have been lapses in security, there have been severe. This suggests, during the election campaigning, there was an extra mobilization of troops to ensure that the elections were free, fair, and secure. But so we do see, if you see pre-election period and post-election period, there is violence. And that for that, I think the security grid needs to ask, important questions. Why is their intelligence failing? And there are indications, there are reports that in Jammu region, I mean, one has to still investigate what happened in Ganderbal, but there are reports, there are security versions that intelligence was failing because the the traditional intelligence networks have been demolished by the present government, and new ones have probably not been put in place. And the traditional networks involved cooperation and coordination with the locals, and somewhere those channels have broken. I think that may be one reason why attacks are taking place. And that's for something for New Delhi to answer. I don't. It would be unfair to pin the blame on Jammu and Kashmir government. Yet, I would say for the Umar Abdullah government, this would be a challenge, and they need to very cautiously navigate it because the BJP would try to blame it.
Given all the complexities and given that it will be difficult for the elected government to function, what are some of the things that you would think it should put as a priority, given that you said that people understand that it may not be able to deliver, but it has to keep expressing exactly what the people want? Given that, what do you think it should prioritize?
I think it should prioritize there is such a deep level of disenchantment. It should prioritize revival of economy. Of course, there's tourism and there's very brisk tourism, which is not a new thing. It has happened in the past as well. But tourism is not the only sector. It contributes to 10 or 15% of the state's economy. So the government needs to prioritize economy, trade, industry, because there is a sense that local industries are being shutting down, and people from outside are being given lands on lease, and that I think that needs to be taken care of. Jobs need to be provided. Recruitments have not happened. The main employment sector in Jammu and Kashmir has been the government sector, while the private sector has not made big inroads in the last 5 years. These government posts are still vacant and have been vacant for a long time. Every recruitment process that happened in the last few years has been marred by some scam or the other. And there is also that fear that outsiders are being preferred over the locals under the new laws. So if the government could address these issues, I think this should be a priority, the first.
One word about political detainees, because there we know that a lot of people have been booked under the strict laws.
No, definitely, especially, well, that would be a little interesting, to say that there is a demand for revoking the Public Safety Act. Now, Public Safety Act was not the creation of the BJP. It was the creation of National Conference by Omar Abdullah's grandfather, Sheikh Abdullah, and to be used against smugglers at that time. But it has been, for decades, been used to crush political opposition or critics, and that but I think now that the party has been a victim, in 2019 of the same act, I think there could be a rethink on that kind of an act. But other than that, I think they should take up the issue of detentions. That is a major issue, if not in the entire state, at least in Kashmir Valley.
Anuradha, thank you for giving us this perspective as usual. We are in Mumbai. We are far from JNK and what's happening there, but clearly it is on the map for people from here, for tourism, for business, and everybody watches very closely. Thank you as usual for putting everything into
A
perspective.
pleasure
I wish
speaking.
you a lot of good luck. We'll keep
Yeah,
talking.
sure. Thank you. A pleasure talking.